Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into something that's honestly going to completely shatter some of your most fundamental assumptions about the biblical wilderness. Seriously, if you're picturing, a sun-scorched desert or a punishment for bad behavior or just some barren wasteland where people wander aimlessly, well, prepare for a massive paradigm shift. Today we're going straight to the source material, the biblical texts and ancient Hebrew translations to figure out what this space actually is. And trust me on this, it's so much more cosmic and way more merciful than just a giant pile of dry sand. Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty counterintuitive question. Think about this for a second. Was Noah floating in the wilderness? I mean, how can a guy on a wooden boat, literally surrounded by a massive global watery flood, be in a wilderness? Just hold on to that question as we really start to peel back the illusion that the wilderness is just, well, a geographical spot on a map defined by a lack of rain. See, we usually think of the wilderness as this dry, sandy place of divine punishment. But when we look at the textual evidence, it points to something totally different. The wilderness can actually be wet, really wet. It is fundamentally a cosmic state of chaos. And instead of being some sort of prison for the condemned, it's actually designed on purpose as a classroom. It's a theological state of being, way more than it's just a set of GPS coordinates. To really grasp this, we've got to anchor ourselves in the Hebrew. The word for wilderness is Midbar. It pops up hundreds of times in the Old Testament. And the key here is what it isn't. It never means a lush forest or a jungle. It's basically the anti-Eden. It's that uncultivated, uninhabited zone where you literally cannot survive on your own. It is the exact space where human self-sufficiency completely collapses. You can't grow crops, you can't build cities, and honestly, that collapse, that's exactly the point, because it's right there at the end of ourselves that divine pedagogy or divine teaching actually begins. So the root of this collapse brings us to this absolutely incredible Hebrew phrase, tohu wabohu. You might actually recognize that from Genesis 1, verse 2, the earth was formless and void. That's the pre-creation state of absolute chaos. The source material reveals that tohu wabohu is, in a way, the cosmic DNA of all biblical wilderness zones. Chaos, not climate, is the unifying thread here. The wilderness is any God-ordained space where creation is sort of temporarily unmade so that human structures fail. And when we stack these events side by side, we see two distinct faces of chaos: dry chaos and wet chaos. This right here proves why Noah absolutely was in the wilderness. Let's look at it. In the dry chaos of the Exodus, the environment is defined by thirst and exposure. Human structures completely fail because, well, there are no crops and no cities. The divine outcome? God drops manna from heaven and opens up a dry path right through the sea. Now, look over at the wet chaos of Noah. The environment is a global flood, tohu wabohu making a massive comeback. Human structures fail again. The ark doesn't have a sail, it has no rudder, Noah is 100% out of control. And the divine outcome? The ark safely comes to rest and a dry new creation emerges. So whether it's the crushing thirst of the desert or the overwhelming waves of the deep, it's the exact same theological cycle. Section 1. Thresholds of Transformation. Now that we've established the wilderness as the zone of cosmic chaos, we really need to realize that these zones aren't just empty voids. They're profound, dynamic, liminal spaces where our normal, everyday realities violently collide with the divine. A perfect example of this is the story of Balaam in Numbers 22. So Balaam is traveling along, and he's stuck in this geopolitical threshold between his loyalty to God and a pagan king named Balak. And what happens? God's angel literally blocks his path, forcing Balaam into a makom sar. That's a Hebrew term that translates to a narrow place. This physical squeezing, it directly mirrors the intense pressure of liminal judgment. It's a space that is so wildly disruptive that normal boundaries just shatter. I mean, even Balaam's donkey starts speaking to him. Balaam's narrow place shows us exactly what the wilderness does as a liminal zone. It's a threshold where you can no longer manipulate what's going on around you. King Balak tries everything. He tries to change mountains, swap out sacrifices, basically manipulate the divine. But human agendas completely fall apart in the chaos zone. God uses these transitional spaces, these margins, to strip us down, expose our true motives, and really refine our absolute reliance on His truth. Section 2. The Classroom of Mercy. This brings us to what I personally think is the most beautiful paradigm shift in our entire explainer. We are completely moving away from the idea of the wilderness as a place of wrath. The old view tells us that the wilderness is a curse, a place where God just abandons us for our rebellion, and it all ends in death. But the new view, the one deeply rooted in the biblical theology we're looking at, reframes the wilderness as a curriculum.
God isn't abandoning us out there. He's accompanying us. It's not for our destruction. It's specifically for divine revelation. It is ultimately a severely merciful classroom.
Exodus chapter 34 just brilliantly illustrates why it's a classroom of mercy. So this famous declaration happens right after the Israelites committed massive, shocking idolatry with the golden calf. By all human logic, the wilderness should have become their permanent graveyard right then and there. But instead, God uses this space of absolute deprivation to reveal his core character. He declares himself merciful, gracious, and slow to anger. He keeps them in the chaos zone not to punish them, but to actually prove his mercy, so they can learn, step by step, how to live by grace.
So how does this curriculum actually work in practice? Well, it operates on a really precise repeating cycle. Step 1, human self-reliance fails. You enter the tohu wabohu, that deep chaos, and you quickly realize your own strength simply cannot save you. Then, step 2, divine word sustains. See, God never sends his people into this void without a prior promise, like telling Noah he'd establish a covenant before the rain even started. That word acts as an anchor. And finally, step 3, trust is retrained. Through that daily, intense dependence, whether that means gathering manna every single morning or just waiting in the dark on an ark, our spiritual foundation gets entirely rebuilt from the ground up.
Section 3, your internal wilderness. Let's bring all this sweeping cosmic theology all the way down to earth, right into our own everyday lives. Because, let's be honest, you don't need to be wandering the Sinai Peninsula or floating in a global flood to experience this exact same theological reality. The book of Psalms perfectly maps this cosmic theology right onto our own human emotional landscapes. When you read through the first 43 Psalms, you see the exact same elements of dry and wet chaos being used as emotional metaphors. You've got the dry chaos of intense spiritual thirst in Psalm 42, or that agonizing feeling of complete forsakenness in Psalm 22. But then, you also have the wet chaos, being stuck in a dark pit in Psalm 40, or feeling waters coming right up to your neck, that terrifying sensation of drowning in Psalm 69. Whether you feel parched and isolated, or completely overwhelmed and drowning, the biblical text recognizes both as the exact same spiritual wilderness.
Which brings us right to our final takeaway. When our human order is totally undone, when survival feels literally impossible without some sort of divine intervention, we often misread the wilderness. And we do that because we're looking through the lens of our own pain rather than the lens of God's character. So the very next time you find yourself squeezed into a narrow place, navigating a season of dry scarcity, or even drowning in wet chaos, try to reframe your perspective. Instead of asking, "Why have I been abandoned?" take a look around the classroom of mercy and ask, "What is God trying to teach me in the chaos?"